Please be seated. So earlier this week, an article from the New York Times caught my attention. The headline from this article was this: Christianity's decline in the U.S. appears to have halted, major study shows. Was that funny? Okay, so clearly you're all aware of the trends over the last several decades. I read the article with curiosity and eagerness, and it talked about the increasing secularization of our nation. As recently as the 1990s, 9 in 10 in this country identified as Christians. And with each passing survey, those numbers plummeted. The greatest increase in any sort of category was what has affectionately become called the nuns. To be clear, that's N-O-N-E-S. That is to say, those who do not affiliate with any religion. The most recent survey came out in 24. And in this survey by Pew Research, not Pew, but Pew Research, in this survey, it indicates that 62% of those in our country now identify as Christian. 62%. I read that and I thought, okay, where's the good news here? Well, apparently that number is actually the same as the last time the survey was taken, back in 2007. So for the first time in decades, there's a leveling off of the decline in people affiliating with one religion or another. All right, maybe there's some good news. Here's what the article said. The story of the studying is complex, but one factor is the youngest cohort of adults in the survey. They appear no less religious than the survey participants in the second youngest cohort, and the gap in religiosity between men and women is far smaller than in older generations. All right, now we got something to work with here, right? Then I read this. The cause of this convergence might be at least partly political. As the perception of Christianity has become increasingly entangled with conservative political movements, identifying as Christian has become a matter of a wider conservative identity. In the words of Scooby-Doo, Ruh-roh. And there's more. The share of self-described liberals who identify as Christians has dropped by 25 points since 2007. Now more than half saying they have no religion at all. Gulp. We get a fantastic story the last Sunday before we enter our Lenten journey. It's the story of Jesus' transfiguration. It's filled with drama. It's filled with mystical occurrences and significantly cranky God. I loved Chase's reading of it. I heard the laughter. There's so much in this story. And of course, it is about Jesus. Of course, he is the star of the show as he goes up the mountain with Peter and John and James to pray. Although I got to just pause right here. If he wants to get away and pray, why is he taking Peter, John, and James along with him? maybe it's because what's about to happen on that mountain is more for their benefit than his. And maybe, while he might be the star attraction, our focus should be more on them than him. Hang on to that notion. The pericope, the passage assigned for today, actually begins a little bit differently than what Chase read. There's a sort of an introductory series of words that reads like this. Now about 8 days after these sayings. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter, John, and James and went up the mountain to pray. Now about 8 days after. 8 days after Jesus had quizzed the disciples, who do you say that I am? And the disciples had finally, or at least Peter had finally said, you're the Messiah. 8 days after Jesus had shared with his closest disciples the fate that awaited him, that he would be arrested, that he would be persecuted, that he would be rejected, and that he would suffer an agonizing death. 8 days after that, 8 days after Jesus had said to them, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. 8 days after all of that, Jesus takes Peter, John, and James up the mountain to pray. I wonder if Peter, John, and James, as they were following him, thought, couldn't we just pray down here? They had to have been exhausted, right? They don't ask him that. All we know is that they make it up to the mountaintop and Jesus falls into prayer, and this is where the good stuff happens. He becomes dazzling white, and these two figures come alongside, Moses and Elijah. Moses, who had led the Israelites out of bondage in Egypt, Elijah, who had been one of the great prophets. These are two of the most storied faith ancestors. There they are on top of the mountain. There they are alongside Jesus. There they are, and the disciples are sleeping. Finally, they wake up, though. Peter wakes up. Maybe it was all the hubbub. We don't know, but they wake up, and I can only imagine they're rubbing their eyes, wondering if they're still dreaming, and they missed everything that Jesus and Elijah and Moses had talked about how he was the fulfillment of the prophecy. They missed all that. Moses and Elijah get ready to leave, and this is where Peter jumps up and says, whoa, wait, this is really good, right? As Chase sort of captured, there was an exuberance and a little bit of, he just doesn't get it. When let's camp out here. Let's do 3 tents. That's his suggestion. And that's when the cloud comes over the mountaintop. And we hear this voice booming from within the clouds. This is my son, my beloved. Listen to him. Do you think that was like a James Earl Jones or a Morgan Freeman kind of? Doesn't matter. You get the point. And they got the point. And they go down. I don't know how they made sense of it. I don't know what the conversation was like as they walked down. But this is what Luke tells us. Luke tells us they kept silent, telling nothing of what they had seen at that time to anyone. They kept silent, telling nothing of what they had seen at that time to anyone. They kept silent as they joined the other disciples, telling them nothing of what they had seen. They kept silent as they waded into this crowd that was down at the base of the mountain. They kept silent as this man burst forth from the crowd because his only son is possessed by a demon. Can you imagine the desperation of this man? He wants someone to heal his son. They kept silent. And they could not or would not heal the son. And Jesus does what they would not or could not do, but not before he says to them, "You unbelieving and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and put up with you?" Yikes. Let's be clear. He's not talking about the crowd. He's not talking about the father, or he's not talking to the demon. He's talking to his disciples. How much longer must I put up with you? Imagine that. So there's so much we can take away from this. Of course, there's much we should name and claim about Jesus. That he is more than just a revolutionary rabbi. That he is a succession in the faith ancestors on the same level and even more than Moses and Elijah. We should take away that he is the fulfillment of God's promises, that he is the embodiment of God's love, that he is the source of new life and new hope. All of those things we should take away from this story about Jesus. But what about the disciples? What can we learn from Peter, John, and James, especially if we imagine that we are Peter, John, and James ourselves? We can learn from what they did, and we can learn from what they didn't do too. We can learn that sometimes we need to get away. We need to make the climb. We need to retreat. We need to say our prayers. We can learn from that. We can learn, as Soren Kierkegaard once said about prayer. He wrote, "Prayer changes the prayer." I love that line. We can learn that prayer changes the prayer. It changed Jesus, and I have no doubt it changed them. It can change you and me as well. We can learn about the importance of getting away to retreat. We can learn that when we get away, we best stay awake. We best keep our eyes open, otherwise we might miss the really good stuff. We can learn about that too. We can learn that we can't stay up on the mountaintop, that that's not our place of permanence, that God calls us to come down. God calls us to come down from the mountaintop or to go out of our churches, because there's a crowd waiting down there. And this is where we can learn that we are called to respond to that crowd. We, as would-be disciples, are called to engage with that crowd that is hurting, that is wanting, that is wounded, that is desperate. And not just called to work with them, to engage with them, but we have the power to help care for them, to help heal them. We have that power. We have more power than our wildest imaginings. I'm not saying that we have that exclusive power. I don't believe in that kind of exclusivity with our faith tradition, but we should never underestimate the power we have through this Jesus whom we know and love. We have the power. We have the power to wade into a crowd that is anxious and to try to calm some of those anxieties. We have that power. We have the power to speak to people who are overwhelmed by fear, for whom their worst instincts are coming out, and to calm those fears. We have that power. We have the power to respond in a way that says, let's stop this tit-for-tat dynamic. We have that power. We have the power to model that the zero-sum game which seems to dominate our society is not the only way to make community. We have that power. We have the power to work for justice, to speak to the injustices. We have the power to bridge divisions. We have the power to bring love into hate. We have that power. We have that power. Oh, sure, there are times when we're the ones who have our own anxieties and our own fears. And certainly we need to tend to those as well, which is why I'm so glad that in our baptismal covenant, when we say that we will do these things, at the very least, we also say we will with God's help. We're not in this on our own. But let us not underestimate the power that we have. I hope and pray that to some degree, this is a little bit of a mountaintop experience each and every Sunday for you. At the least, I hope it's a sacred space, but then we've got to go outside these doors. We've got to look at the crowd, and we've got to be in touch with the power we have to respond to that crowd. Will you? Can you? There are so many ways that we can be like Peter, John, and James, disciples, all of us. But I want to say, even as we learn from what they've done, let us also learn not to do one thing. Remember, as they come down the mountain, Luke says that they said no one to anyone about anything that they had seen and heard. Sounds like they were Episcopalians. Let's not make that mistake. Let's find our voice and our power to tell our stories about what we've seen, about what we've heard, about what we have done and what we aim to do. And if we find that power, if we find that courage, then maybe, just maybe, the next time the Pew survey comes out, then just maybe some of the other numbers will be different. We have that power. Amen.